Recording has started, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chloe. Welcome everyone to the Energy Subcommittee of the South West Wales Corporate Joint Committee. My name's Paul Miller. I'm the Deputy Leader at Pembrokeshire Council and I'm Chair of this subcommittee this afternoon. First item on the agenda is Chair's announcements. I don't have any. Declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest from members present? One perhaps, Liz?
Yes, as Chloe knows, I declare every meeting of this because my consultancy does a lot of community-based energy work. I always declare an interest that potentially it overlaps with this committee. So Chloe, can you use the same form of words or send me another form that we used last time?
Yes, of course, I'll action that after the meeting, Liz. Okay.
That's
Perfect.
right,
Thank you.
Okay. Minutes of the previous meeting then, item 3, they're on pages 3 to 10, 27th of February. Any comments at all on the accuracy of those? Doesn't look like it. Can I have a proposer to approve them then, please?
Happy to move, Chair.
Thank you, Reese. And Steve to second. That's great. Thank you very much. I think just a quick show of hands in favour if everyone's happy. Yeah, that's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, so just I suppose just very briefly to cover, in Pembrokeshire we've had a sort of leadership election over the last couple of days, so we're welcoming Councillor John Harvey, who's the new leader at Pembrokeshire. We haven't officially appointed our cabinet yet, so Reese is here. He's definitely going to carry on as a cabinet member, but he's not officially a cabinet member today. So that's why John's with us, just to make sure the quorum and whatever is covered. But for anyone wondering who John is, he's the new leader at Pembrokeshire, and I'm sure you'll be seeing a lot more of him over the next couple of days and weeks. You don't want to say anything? Yeah, you do want to say something, John. Say hello.
Well, yes, thank you, Paul. Not wanting to prolong the meeting, but just to say, I know some of you here, Andrew, I think from my days in Swansea and one or two others, so it's lovely to be here and look forward to working with everybody across the region. So thank you.
Thanks, John. That's great. So agenda item 4, costed decarbonisation delivery plans and the funding challenge to net zero 2030. There is a report, pages 11 to 16. We've also got the author here who was front and centre on my screen. He's back. Jeff. Jeff, do you want to take us through it? Give us a bit of a summary and give us something to start us thinking?
Yes, I'm going to chew on. Thank you, Chair. Do you want me to share the report or has everyone got it in front of them so they can have a read? Leave it to your
personally guidance. I think everyone's got it, but shout if anyone disagrees. No, I think everyone's got it, Jeff. Just talk us through it.
Fine, happy to talk through it. My cabinet member, Councillor Andrew Lewis, is here as well, so just in case she wants to add anything into it, feel free to chip in. The report covers two clear items. One is about costed decarb plans, and from that, the funding challenge that we're all facing at the moment. I raised the topic as something that I felt that perhaps this group could certainly add a huge amount of input into and guidance. So following that, was instructed to draft the report. So this is really coming from a Swansea perspective only, and I suppose that's probably not a bad place to start because Swansea was the first authority to jump in reaction to the WAO instruction that we all have a net zero ambition. We needed all to fully cost our action plans and to ensure that it was aligned with the medium-term financial plan. The reality is that's an incredibly difficult ask, but I was more than happy to respond to the challenge. And we presented a very high-level costed delivery plan, and it was high-level and probably hugely inaccurate, but it was a way of actually coming to a point of monetizing what the actual ask was going to look like. So we looked at it in a relatively scientific way. The biggest area was buildings and energy when it comes to sort of the generation of carbon emissions. So we looked at what we'd done previously in terms of retrofit activity. We looked at what we could actually achieve with advice from local partnerships, Welsh Government Energy Services, when it came to the next phase of refit. So we gave an estimate of about 7 million quid that would give us in the region of 4,500 tonnes of carbon reduction, which left us a residual of about 13,000 tonnes. We made the assumption that we wouldn't get better than 80% reduction of carbon emissions. You're never going to get to 100%. There's always going to be an element of a residual that you're never going to get beyond. We used a figure of 80%, and we applied a cost based on previous retrofit examples, a cost per ton of reducing carbon. We knew that would be understated because the refit proposals that everyone's putting forward are the lower hanging fruit. They're the easy ones. So to go beyond that is obviously going to cost you a bit more, but that was all we had in terms of an estimate in terms of what that cost would be. That gave us a figure of about 93 million and a residual of about 3,000 tons of carbon. So a way of getting to a point of coming up with a figure. So just shy of 100 million, but still 3,000 tons to reduce. Street lighting, slightly easier. We know what we're doing in terms of our LED program. If you continue with LED installation across all the street lighting, there was a cost, but again, it wouldn't take you down to a nil figure. There would still be a residual CO2 emissions that you have to take into account. It's more efficient, but it won't take you to zero. Fleet, we had a cost based on everything electrifying the entire fleet, and that took us in theory down to zero. But again, the practice is there will be a residual amount, but we didn't put that in because effectively we didn't know what that residual amount would look like. You still got to charge the vehicles up unless you've got on-site production of solar to charge the vehicles. Then we looked at grey fleet, a small amount of grey fleet, and this is, sorry, back in 22, this is based on WG guidance about emissions, and it's obviously changed and it continues to change, but there was a grey fleet figure of just shy of 300 million, grey fleet being business mileage for staff using their own vehicles. We made the assumption, based on a £1.5 million investment into social care, that would take us down to zero again. That's understated. There's no two ways about it. It won't take everybody out of the equation. So they gave us a figure, 160 million or so, still with a large amount of residual emissions that we would have to offset in some way, shape or form. And the way that we went about monetizing that, getting a figure on it was, okay, you can go out and theoretically buy 1,000 hectares of established forest, or you could buy annual carbon credits, neither of which would be the route, neither of which would probably, when it comes in particular to buying established forest in Swansea, would be simply unachievable. There wouldn't be that much in one location or even multiple locations that would be on the market and readily available. But I knew what the cost per hectare would be, which gave us an additional figure of 27.5 million. So in total, we were just shy of 200 million in terms of total cost. That triggered a conversation, and I'm pleased to say that triggered a conversation nationally. Victoria Camp's on the call. She can talk in a minute if needs be to give some sort of advice in terms of the national approach that's now been adopted that will give everyone a consistent approach to it. Through local partnerships, they're going to develop a scenario planner that builds on the work already undertaken with Cardiff. It'll be a planner that will be hosted online, made freely available, which will give us all the opportunity to feed in different scenarios and establish what that cost would be to take us down to a net zero figure. One thing that's evident, having done that exercise back in 2022, I've said previously, it's understated. We've looked at the cost per tonne, and we've done some more work with a company called SEA Partners through a Welsh government-funded grant exercise that looked at some collaborative sites, and the figure of 7,500 tonnes is probably near 11,500 tonnes if we are going to invest and spend and actually reduce emissions. And the expectation would be you'd be lucky to get to 55% reduction as opposed to an 80% reduction. So the residual figure that needs offsetting is probably going to be larger. So probably feeding into the work Victoria is going to hopefully talk about in a minute, that would give us an indication of there being a higher cost beyond the 200 million or so we originally sort of estimating when we reported back in 2022. What all of this does, of course, is give us an indication of how much money we'd need. I don't think any authority is going to have that much money in the capital programme. At the moment, we are just bidding for grant monies wherever we possibly can. Refit is obviously our first port of call because that used to be interest-free money. It's not anymore. There is a small interest charge. But we're going into our second and subsequent phases of refit to do the best we can in terms of attaching ourselves to cash that isn't coming out of borrowing from our central capital programme. Beyond that, it's grants. And we are having to sort of have on the shelf oven-ready schemes so that when a grant comes up where you've got a limited time span to actually apply for grants and get the money spent, we have to use that to circulate it into any applications. That's difficult because you've got to horizon scan and see whatever grants are out there. Plus, quite often you've got to find match funding. That then leads to a process where we have to bid against our own capital programs, and that's causing some difficulties, certainly in Swansea. I know some other authorities have set up individual pots for that, but those pots have been spent. So the match funding criteria is causing an issue for us. To be fair, Chair, you've asked when we had a bit of a pre-meet about what the ask would be from authorities to make our life easier. That would be one where having the match funding ask is causing us some difficulty. Plus, it's the individual pockets of schemes that are causing us difficulty as well. Individual grant applications, to make sure we're not missing on a grant application. Sometimes they're the same but dressed up in a different way. Having an easier approach to the available cash would make life so much easier for us. We're all serious about this business of getting to net zero. It's just making our lives easier if we can get to that point. So that's a very rapid sort of talk through my report. Hopefully that gives an indication of where we are from a Swansea perspective. Happy to take any questions and any advice from others.
No, great, Jeff. Thank you very much. Before I invite sort of member colleagues in, officer colleagues, anyone like to follow up or add to that? Okay.
Sorry, on that point, Chair, before you ask a question, it'd be helpful to know what
follow up on yourself, Jeff.
I'm following up on you in terms of, like Kendall's now put his hand up. It'd be good to know where others are in terms of how they approach the costed planning exercise, at the very least. So I prompted them on your behalf there, and Kendall's reacted.
Kendall.
I've fallen for the bait. Yes, I'm reacting. No, we've adopted a similar approach as Swansea, and in cricket, it's known as the Duckworth-Lewis method. When you work out what the scores are if it's rain affected, and for costing our net zero carbon plan, it's the Bacon method we've gone for. So we've got comparable sort of range of figures effectively, slightly less, but around the 150 million mark. The one thing that is consistent as well is the scope of our net zero carbon emissions that we're reporting on. Jeff mentioned the 4 direct emissions. What the elephant in the room is there that the Welsh Government commitment to net zero includes procurement, which we haven't endeavoured to calculate because that's an impossible task in all fairness. But certainly on the 4 metrics that Jeff mentioned, we've got a similar, slightly less overall figure. Is a health warning on it. We went for the low carbon heat grant, which Welsh Government were offering at 90%. Went for 6 primary schools, quite low users, but on oil and LPG currently, converting them to electricity air source heat pumps. We had a grant of just under 4 million, 90% grant, but the work was, obviously, 100% grant. So it was about £4.5 million overall, effectively, but 4 of that was grant funded. So if you applied that to Jeff's figures, it worked out at a higher rate than what the unit costs are in that calculation. So just to flag, Jeff's approach, definitely the first in Wales to calculate what the commitment is, but it is likely to be an underestimate compared to what's actually required to because I know Cardiff have looked at it, and when they looked at their schools, the larger schools, they've looked at the cost for decanting pupils for some 12 months into a new school whilst the work is done, because it's such intensive work required. So it's a big agenda. We certainly haven't got the answers. Have a figure, courtesy of Jeff, but that's as far as we go. Ideally, we'd want a consistent approach throughout Wales, which allowed all authorities to come up with a consistent methodology, which also, well, I can't see procurement being included by anyone really, because it is a nightmare to calculate carbon emissions, let alone equate how one would pass that down the supply chains to our contractors and others effectively. So yeah, nothing much to add. I've talked a lot, but nothing much to add other than we've done a similar exercise, similar figures, and yeah, we're interested to see what happens next.
Thank you very much, Kendall. So I'll bring you in, Victoria. It sounds like at least half of us, probably all of us, have done a good job of coming up with some enormous numbers. Over to you from a Welsh Government perspective.
Of course, thank you, Councillor. And just for those of you who don't know, I'm Victoria Camp. I'm your strategic lead from the Welsh Government Energy Service. Just to add some things, not questions really, and I think Kendall covered the first one, that this is just your scope 1 and 2. Your scope 3 emissions aren't included here. There is a climate strategy panel task and finish group with a focus on procurement, and that is looking at the ways in which we can support local authorities, whether that's through some kind of mechanism to help you work it out more in a more sophisticated way, or working directly with the supply chain just to help them reduce their emissions. So there is some work going on there.
For those less expert on call, plan for one.
So, well, scope 1 is your direct emissions, scope 2 indirect, and scope 3 is generally your supply chain. So the other thing, just to kind of message, and I'm hoping my colleague Ed Barlow will join to talk about the net zero scenario planner. If he doesn't join, then I can talk about it once we've finished this item. But there is a kind of need to balance how granular you want to get about working out the cost towards getting net zero versus getting on and delivering. And I think what Swansea and Carmarthenshire have done is strike that balance right. You know, the number isn't correct, but it gets you part of the way to understanding the kind of size and the scale and the pace that we need to get there. What we hope the scenario planner will do will just help you prioritise then, because obviously, as you all know, there's not £200 million sitting in a pot somewhere for Swansea to do all of that. I think one of the things that it does highlight, and as we get further into having this net zero planner, and you've all got your adopted or approved local area energy plans, is the need for sort of regional or aggregated work, because what we're hearing on the sort of supply side is that actually having kind of investable pipelines of opportunities are the things that they've got the kind of scale that mean private sector investors would be attracted, versus just doing things on your own as one local authority. Where those opportunities are and the types of projects, that's really for you as a region to kind of work up together with our support. And then the last point, I think, was on the Bacon method of calculating your offsetting. It's just the sort of latest update from Welsh Government, and again, South West are ahead on this, because I know you've had some advice from consultants on offsetting, is that Welsh Government really still view offsetting as the absolute last resort, and they really do want everybody focused on all reasonable efforts to reduce emissions. We are working very hard on what offsetting might look like, and there is a team now in Welsh Government that is looking at what that might look like. The technicalities of it are quite mind-blowing. I hadn't realised that there were a whole world around offsetting, but indeed there is. And what we're trying to say is that we need to plug that gap for local authorities, because you're all trying to work out how much it's going to cost. You're never going to get to zero. And whether it's 2030 or 2050, what do you do with your residual emissions, and how do you account for them, or how do you offset them? So we are trying to see if we can fill that gap at the minute where there isn't any information coming from Welsh Government with something. But I don't think that will be coming in the short term future. So that was just a few salient updates from me, hopefully. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Victoria.
Sorry, did you call me in?
Briefly here, Andrea.
You're breaking up quite a bit, Paul. Sorry. Yeah.
Rural Pembrokeshire, I'm afraid. Yeah, you, Andrea.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Yeah, and my thanks to Jeff for all the work that's gone into this. What it's definitely done, that I like the Bacon methods. That's brilliant. What it's definitely done is given us more of a firmer understanding, albeit an estimate of the cost implications, trying to give some clarity as to what we're looking at. I completely agree with Kendall's comments as well. I think this will benefit us if we're all on the same template, measuring in a similar way. This is going to definitely benefit us as a region. All the better if it's done on a national basis. That would be great. But coming back to Victoria's comments, which I was going to touch upon really, what's the benefit of us doing this? And I think one of the biggest benefits are around the commonalities, where we can co-procure, where we can find a priority for us as a region. But one of the things, just directed probably more at Victoria than anyone else in terms of offsetting, we do get frustrated that even though we purchase 100% renewable energy, that isn't counted at all in terms of offsetting. And I think that's a missed opportunity, and I'll keep banging the drum on this because I know the Welsh Government don't agree with my position on this. But I think we are, we're missing an opportunity there, and we're actually setting councils up to fail if we don't count that renewable energy purchase, because effectively we could go out, we could purchase fossil fuels, and it wouldn't make any difference, which feels like it's a bit of a nonsense. So I think we should get credit when we're purchasing 100% renewable energy. That's something I feel very strongly about. And I think there needs to be an acceptance as well. We're never going to get to absolute zero. That is an impossible target. And if we set ourselves that, we're going to fail. So it's what can we really achieve when we push the boat up and do everything we can and get all the finance and all the resource that we need from Welsh Government. And, flexibility of grants is a big one in terms of, give us enough time, let us roll things over if we need to. Because we do want to achieve, as much carbon emission reduction as we possibly can. But it's about working with us to make sure that we can find solutions to be able to do that, because it does feel a little bit, there's a lack of being joined up a little bit. So if you can make the cause for us to get plaudits when we purchase renewable energy, I'm sure that would be gratefully received across the region, probably across Wales.
Great, thank you very much, Andrea. Brett, you're next on the list.
Thank you very much, Councillor Miller. I just wanted to say this is my first attendance at the Energy Subgroup Committee meeting.
And you're very welcome, Brett.
Thank you very much. I'm recently into a new post that's been created in the council. So I'm the new decarbonisation strategy manager for Neath Port Talbot. So it's nice to meet you all. Just following on from Jeff's comments, and just to update you on what Neath Port Talbot are doing. So in January, we commissioned the Carbon Trust to help us formulate a net zero costed plan. We expect that to be concluded in about October, November of this year, and that will integrate the local partnerships net zero plan tool into the analysis to sense check the findings of the Carbon Trust. So obviously when we have that report, we can update you on the findings at that time.
Thanks very much, Brett. And just slightly out of order then, since that's 3 of the 4 councils told us roughly where they are. Daniel, do you want to chip in on a Pembrokeshire perspective, and then I'll come back to you, Victoria, if that's okay?
Yeah, I thought I'd come in from a Pembrokeshire point of view. So we haven't adopted the Bacon methodology as of yet, and we've done it slightly differently, I think, to the other 3 authorities, where we've done it more on sort of a case by case basis to try and keep it cost neutral, and that's sort of been the approach that we've had so far. I've been aware now for sort of a few weeks as this has been talked about the scenario planner, and I'm interested to sort of know about whether that's going to be a rework perspective, or sort of if that's going to come as a rework, whether if we do this cost analysis and work out what this cost is, and then the scenario planner comes in, is it going to have to be sort of a whole nother exercise that we're going to have to do to give a different approach, or is it going to work in line with that sort of methodology that we're talking about today?
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Victoria?
Sure. So I could talk about the scenario planner once we finish this bit. So do come back to me, and I can update you all on that. I just wanted to come back to Councillor Lewis. I'm beating the drum as hard as I possibly can, and Kendall and Jeff will attest to that in terms of the anomalies in the carbon reporting. There is a specific lot under the Energy Service and Carbon Trust are looking into how they can update the guidance, and actually as a result of the pressure that we've put on and raising it, the first 2 things they're looking at are renewables. So your own development of renewables, and then the purchase of REGOs as well, because at the minute you're actually being penalised because REGOs cost you more to buy. So we are doing everything we can. I don't think the appointment of Carbon Trust to that were able to start in time for this year in order to make any meaningful changes. So the reporting, I think, will be largely the same this year. But there is, as I understand it, a working group, which I hope some of the energy officers on the call are part of, and if you're not, then let me know and I can make sure that you get into those groups that is looking at those issues, and making sure that as the reporting methodology grows and changes and evolves over time, it gets more sophisticated and can take into consideration those things. So I'm very much with all of you in the region, banging the drum on that and on the offsetting as well. So I hear your frustrations and the funding one as well, and timescales and things. So very much with you.
Thanks, Victoria. Back to you, Jeff.
Yeah, the sooner we stop calling it the Bacon method, the better, quite frankly, because I already said it was wrong and flawed and massive guesswork. So that'll be handy.
There might be a short period on the speaker circuit before they realise it's flawed. There, Jeff.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, early retirement beckons. Just to follow on from Councillor Lewis's point, from a Swansea perspective, one thing that using renewables is critically important, because I've spoken to contractors who were building a building for Swansea, and they were broadly sort of lauding the fact that this is going to be net zero building. And I was thinking, well, how are you managing that? Well, so the residual usage, you just buy off of a green renewable energy provider. And so we're way out of kilter with what a lot of the industry thinks is actually happening. So I'm actually 100% on board with the fact that we should be using that as an easy, quick, cheap solution to getting net zero by just buying green energy. But we have to accept the fact that we're going to have little choice at the end of the day, and it's how we look at a national approach to that. If you're buying green energy from the Welsh Government national energy provider, then that might do the job and that might help. The other thing that's relevant to this is obviously Brett, from a Neath Talbot perspective, they've gone to Carbon Trust and done the right thing in terms of getting an accurate costed plan. But of course, that costs money, doesn't it? And that money might have been better spent on doing something in a local school, for example, as opposed to just paying consultants to give us a figure that just gives you a high figure that is going to be very difficult to achieve. So, I'm looking forward to the scenario planner, because that's a freely available opportunity for all of us, and that's the better use of public money. The other thing that's also probably relevant and possibly for another future discussion is schools. The way schools are treated in a different way across all authorities. 50% of our emissions on buildings are from schools, but schools are funded differently. And we're looking at a refit program for schools, but they have to make a choice about, are they going to invest in in new kit and technology that will have an 8 to 10 year payback when they've got other things they want to spend their money on. So we're working very hard about behaviour change pieces, because that's free, but even so, it still needs some resource for them to put into it. So perhaps a consistent way of dealing with schools might be something that we could talk about in future that might help across the board. That just came to me as we're talking about now. Hopefully, lots to talk about in the future, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Gareth.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Gareth Jones. I'm here as the officer representative for Banai National Park Authority. Just from the national park perspective, we are similarly, like the local authorities, feeding into the Welsh Government net zero reporting. Our carbon footprint is considerably smaller as organisations, but we are still providing similar information. The areas that we're focusing on at the moment are procurement and waste. They're the areas that we are finding that we have the biggest remaining footprint that we are looking to address going forward. So just to feed that in, thank you.
Thank you very much, Gareth. So with no one else in the queue at the moment, so from my perspective, when we had our sort of chairs pre-briefing prior to this, my sort of question to officer colleagues was, okay, so here's some really big numbers. We all knew they were going to be really big numbers, and no one around the table's got any real plan to get us there anytime soon. So what are we doing? So what's this discussion about, and how can we take some sort of tangible steps to support the effort? So my ask of colleagues really was, well, short term then, in the next couple of years, say, what are the key asks of Welsh Government and other colleagues to help us keep the ball rolling towards net zero? What are the key barriers in the way? So Jeff has given us a couple there in his introduction. Anything else from anyone along those lines? What are the key things that we should be taking from this subcommittee, either directly to Welsh Government through Victoria or otherwise, or up to the CJC committee? Daniel, you've put your hand up.
Yeah, I just thought I'd come in. It kind of touches on the point that Jeff raised about having sort of an oven ready sort of number of schemes that we can go to funding with, because that is a huge problem that we've got is that it feels very reactive once you hear about this funding, that you're scrambling to go and find sort of a bit of resource or a bit of time to bring the project together to go and find the funding. And I think this ties quite closely in with the levels of resource that we've got, especially in Pembrokeshire. It would be a lot sort of better if we had more resource to be able to then look at these oven ready schemes and go and find the funding, because a lot of the time that it takes is actually going out to the market and finding where the funding is, what it is, and then finding out how to apply for it and what we need and all of those other things. So I would say that would be quite a key area of focus from my point of view.
Thank you very much. Anyone else want to come in on that point at all? Kendall?
Yeah, I just echo the same thing, really. I mentioned the scheme we had in place to make use of the government's low carbon heat grant. Much lauded. It did give advance notice. We were lucky at the time we were able to get our ducks in order, because we had money for feasibility studies to preempt the actual introduction of the grant funding. So we had almost 4 million, well, 4 million for that funding. For that second round, which has just closed, similar 90% grant funding, but with all the cuts we're having at the moment, we were unable to fund the feasibility studies because there was an element of speculation attached. There wasn't a guarantee that they would deliver grant funding. And also the 10% that was made available, we had to put in ourselves. We were simply unable to fund. So whilst it looks great on paper, it's 90% funding, that 10% was a killer blow. Welsh Government, I would argue, would say that, well, we're the ones who made the climate change commitment, so we should be prepared to put our hands in our pockets. But it's difficult with competing budgets as they are to go for something which, in the case of low carbon heat, there's no business case for it. It effectively, once you've done the work, it costs you more to run it because you've gone from lower cost energy source to a higher cost one. So it's that anomaly beyond us, beyond Welsh Government, UK level really, is to looking at the tariffs of the various energy uses really, until they can make the business case there, which we're happy to go if there's a business case, if it's a long-term payback of 6, 7 plus 8, 9 years. If there's a business case, we're happy to go for it. But when the business case simply isn't there, to actually spend money, to actually increase the bills is a bit frustrating, and we're unable to go there really, to be honest. And I think that'll be the big, another elephant in the room as far as procurement is heating. It just simply doesn't pay. There's no investment, there's no incentive to do the work because there are no savings effectively as we currently stand. But that's the end of the Carmarthenshire comment anyway.
I think it's one we all recognise. I mean, wrestling money out of the finance directorate is possible when you can tell them why, but when you tell them that all you're going to do is bake in some additional heating costs, it's quite a difficult argument to make. Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. I guess we've talked about some of this before and separately, but I just think that hearing some of my thoughts reflected by colleagues in terms of the resource to forward plan, also the resource to get involved in prevention activity is really essential. As local authorities are often just required to, aren't they, and find the budget. But I do wonder about the development of a sort of regional master plan approach on this, building up from the Bacon method, would be a good thing to do. I think that allied to us having regional plans, understanding what some of our industrial colleagues are doing in order to understand what the overall carbon reduction picture looks like, is important, and whilst challenging to quantify, probably in all of our interest to do so. I think it's something that some of our industrial partners would value as well. I'm thinking about some of the regional projects we've got and the opportunities that come through them, like Celtic Freeport, like all the plans for Swansea Bay. I think there's some mileage in doing that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. And I can see Daniel's hand's gone back down. So, okay, I'm just wondering how we gently draw this to a close with some useful sort of things that we can take forward after the fact. It feels like, if nothing else, a little list of Aled, you've put your hand up and you haven't come in, so I'll go straight to you, mate.
Yeah, so I didn't want to cut across you there, and thanks to everybody who's contributed to this immense piece of work that every authority is doing. This is probably aimed at my political colleagues here. I guess it's an open secret that we're not going to get to net zero, and we're all talking about it in these kinds of forums, but nobody's courageous enough to say it out loud. And I was even asked a question in full council last week, where are we on this? And I had to give a fluffy, ambitious kind of answer about, yes, we're in it long term, we've committed, etc. But as a region, is there the appetite there to kind of make a statement? I know other bodies
right behind you, Aled,
have rolled back their ambitions previously, and they've had some pushback on that. I'm just thinking of the Scottish government, etc. But you know, the longer we leave it, then I know this shouldn't be a political platform, but who's going to just say it out loud? And if we're all in it together, expressing the challenges that we've got, we're better off doing it together than maybe one authority or one member saying it at a time and facing the consequences and everybody else backing out. Just
well, I can't speak for anyone else, but that was my plan, Aled. I was going to let you go out first and disown you, but no. Andrea.
Yeah, it's a very good point, actually, and I'm really glad that it's been raised. I don't think any council would want to be the first to say that this is going to be an impossible challenge. And I think I missed the net zero meeting on Friday, but I'm hoping and assuming that there was pushback on the proposal from Welsh Government to reduce the target from 2050 to 2035, because I think we're going to struggle as local authorities, and we're never going to hit that target. I think perhaps this might be one which sits better with WLGA, and we move as a pack. So all 22 councils say, you know, we have concerns about this. And I think in that, nobody's going to stick out, even as a region. You know, I think it's probably better to do it that way. I could see a lot of people nodding. I think there's more strength in numbers as 22, and we can ask the lead cabinet member, or there's the climate change group is there on the WLGA. Perhaps it's better to do it through that, but I do agree. We put in, if I recall, in our notice of motion to begin with, when we set the emergency back in 2019, we put something like we will aim to achieve it by 2030. I don't think we ever said we definitely will. But it's woolly, isn't it? So I think, yeah, probably best through the WLGA, I would have thought.
As well, which is well placed to do that. Victoria, did you want to come in at this juncture?
Yeah, just to say, I mean, if Welsh Government were here, I don't know what they would say about the idea of a collective message, but what I know they would want to say is that it is a team effort, and very much from their perspective, it is a team effort. There was never a kind of anticipation that every local authority or every public sector organisation was going to get to zero, because that just clearly wouldn't be feasible. So I think what they, and perhaps the public, and perhaps that's why there's been the sort of pushback in Scotland, is just that we're all making every effort we can to get as close as we can, and changing behaviours, changing minds, and making sure that those decisions, those carbon-based decisions, are running through all of our organisations, and so that these conversations aren't just happening in an energy subcommittee, they're happening in a housing committee and in a transport one, and that we're all thinking about our collective effort, not just this energy subcommittees and you as the politicians on this group. I think you know, taking it to the WRJ is a good idea, but perhaps just think about what your local authority commitments were, and if they were sufficiently vague, then the need for a statement might not be there in the way that you think it is, and it might be that we all just carry on pressing ahead as hard as we can, and we press the levers that we can in terms of we need the funding, we need more certainty on that funding pipeline. We don't need to be phoned in December and told we've got to find, we've got to spend £1 million, and we can help you as the energy service, and with the regional team we can help you look at what those specific projects are and how we can push those levers collectively, because there definitely is more strength to do that together. That's all I just wanted to add. And also, Councillor, hopefully you've seen Ed's joined now and is able to talk about the net zero scenario planner when the group's ready.
Okay, thank you very much, Victoria. So just in conclusion, I think I tend to sort of side with Victoria on that discussion about, forward trajectory and messaging from the authority. I think it kind of is a WLGA thing, and there's merit in both, right, Aled? So there's merit in being ambitious at the same time as recognizing the challenges. So there's something there about, I guess, thinking carefully what the message is, while completely accepting your point that everyone in the know around this table realizes that sort of net zero 2030 looks hard, to understate it as much as I possibly can. Did you want to come back?
I was just going to say, yeah, thanks. I just wanted the first go at air in it. I just wanted to know where everybody else was on this. Are we all feeling the same, that we're not being open to the electorate about actually there's a challenge? I fully understand WLGA would be the best platform for that, but because I haven't spoken to anybody, any other cabinet member individually on it, I just wanted to put a feeler out there to see, are you feeling the same, and should it be, I guess, taken to the appropriate forum, which is definitely the WLGA.
Thanks, Aled. And then in the short term, and sort of I was looking for some outputs from this discussion, because the discussion itself is very interesting and helpful, but I wonder if we could make some recommendations somewhere. I've heard the bit about sort of grant consolidation and grant simplification, and I think that's one we all agree with. I can see sort of nodding around the table. The bit about the match, I mean, I'm not putting solutions on the table, but I just wonder if that's an issue to run up the flagpole where that commercial return or payback is not available. Is that match something that we could create regionally or create centrally with Welsh Government or something? I just wonder if that's one to put on the list. Is there anything else that anyone would like to sort of add to that short-term asks to keep the ball rolling as efficiently and effectively as possible? There's something there about the regional master plan, isn't there? But I'm wondering if that perhaps flows from the calculator that we're about to talk about. Anything else from anyone? No. Okay, well, that's fine. Jeff?
Sorry, on that, Chair, I think there is a piece of work that officers in conjunction with WGS need to do in terms of just like consolidating and probably put some meat on the bones in terms of those asks. So I think that's still an output from this meeting, is us being charged to go off and sit down together. I think our workshop's planned in any event. Is that right, Victoria? So I think that's something that we can do way before the next meeting and feed that through.
Definitely.
That's an output, I think, in itself, if that's all right.
That back here, with the sort of, we had this discussion, there were some suggestions, we were tasked with going away and looking at it, and here's our sort of final recommendations to put to whoever that we can just kind of review at the next meeting and endorse. Does that sound like a good plan?
That's perfect. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair.
Okay, great, we'll do that then. Thank you very much. So that concludes that item, but I'm conscious that Victoria and colleagues want to talk to us a bit about the calculator. So we'll do that now, if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah, of course. Are you happy to lead that, Ed?
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't prepared any slides. I was just going to sort of talk you through it from point zero, as it were. So yeah, hello, I'm Ed Barlow. I work with Victoria at Local Partnerships, and I suppose part of my job is putting together the net zero scenario planner. It's a calculator, but what the tool will do, to put it bluntly, is we're going to suck up data from each of your authorities, principally around building emission or building energy usage, street lighting, and fleet. And in this way we've done with other sort of tools, is this will be mapped out over the coming 5 or 6 years to 2030, applying the change in emissions factors that come from electricity, and then turning on certain interventions on street lighting, on fleet, and for buildings a few different variations, so that it can be sort of clearly seen. If you implement these measures, this is what happens to the council's emissions. So in particular, so for fleet and street lighting, this is a move to electric vehicles and a switch to LEDs. For buildings, there are a few different options that essentially build from a decarbonisation only option to then add in energy efficiency measures to, I think there was a point earlier on regarding affordability of these things. So add in energy efficiency to help make that more affordable on the revenue side, and then add in renewables as well, again, to make this more affordable. This is going to be a custom model for each of the 22 authorities. So each authority will get a link to their own Power BI run sort of output. And then you can turn on options so that you can see the impact of delaying the implementation of that measure by a year. Picking up on the conversation here, one of the metrics this will produce is a shortfall in 2030 figure. So even with the best will in the world, because the grid will not be zero carbon by 2030, even if you've implemented everything, there will be a shortfall. This will also give you a caveated but a headline capital figure for implementing the measures that have been identified. And again, that's perhaps something that will play into the communications and how you want to tackle this agenda. And there's a narrative perhaps there around what's required to achieve this. And they're going to be big numbers. There are going to be hundreds of buildings that are in scope here, hundreds of vehicles that need converting, and this is not going to be a couple of million. This is going to be hundreds of millions, I would estimate, per authority. It will also again caveated, because the what electricity and gas prices will do is fiendishly difficult to know. But for a nominal value, this will tell you what the revenue change will be as well. So some of these are energy saving. It should, it'll in many cases be hopefully cost neutral. But if in some cases, you did just a convert to heat pump, in a very old building, you may find that there's a positive revenue impact if you see so a higher running cost. So this will help tease out some of those changes as well. In terms of timelines, the data request has gone out. Essentially, we will get that back around the end of June, spend the summer building the models, and then come sort of September, October time, we'll be running a training event for authorities so staff can see how to use the tool. A summary report will be sent to the WLGA for kind of overall findings, but then it will be over to officers and staff to test the tool, to run scenarios, to see how it aligns with what's already planned. And pull the results into whatever is needed. So happy to go into any of that in more depth, but I'll probably say less at this point and see where the conversation goes.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there'd be much conversation, and the lack of hands suggests that there won't be. I think it's more sort of very interested in what you're developing and keen to see that sort of consistent methodology. Andrea?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Edward. I'm just thinking, if we look specifically at fleet as an example, then there are still some unknowns, but we could be fairly certain, for example, that hydrogen is going to be part of that fleet mix. So how do we, I guess this is shifting sands as technologies progress. Because I don't believe, for example, Swansea has got 900 vehicles in our fleet. We're probably one of the largest fleets, I should imagine. And we're working on trying to bring those numbers down and questioning whether we need all those vehicles. But we've got all sorts of difficulties. If it would be impossible, I think, for us to change that fleet to all electric, because the grid simply wouldn't cope with charging all of those. And also electric isn't necessarily suitable for certain things. We've been trialing refuse vehicles, but we're quite a hilly city. And I think hydrogen is probably a better option for us. And also the practicalities of refueling with hydrogen is easier. We get a number of employees who take vehicles home, but they might not necessarily be able to charge on, using their electricity. It's full of complications. So I guess the plan, how does that all factor into the plan, this ever-changing tide of technologies coming forward? It's a bit sort of VHS and Betamax, it feels like at the moment, but you're probably too young for that.
I have used the VHS, but I wasn't around for the battle. So it is. But that one's downplay. I mean, there are going to be some limitations to this. This is not a set of feasibility studies at a kind of authority level to work out what the best solution there will be for vehicles. We've tried to customize the build inside around this as well. We're going to have to take some assumptions here to make the model just work at this kind of scale. And equally, yeah, technology will evolve now and over the coming 5 years, and it will, if we were to do this annually, it might be that we can then, adjust what the model is asking for, what assumptions are we making in terms of, move to vehicles, or at the moment, again, to allow this to be worked out 22 times, there's an assumption around a static sized fleet. I think that the outputs will be, your team will be able to take that in a spreadsheet and say, well, actually, look, if we understand where that's come from, the inputs that went into that, you could do it sort of fast forward you to the point where you could do a bit of in-house manipulation to say, well, actually, look, a third of the fleet's going to be hydrogen, so we can take out, a proportion of that. But yeah, it's not. We haven't got the sort of resource to go into each authority and suck up and produce a custom model. This is a single framework, if you like, that's going to be applied 22 times, and we've customized it in a few areas to try and make it as relevant as possible. But I think we're going to need to round the numbers up quite heavily. I'm conscious when you do these models spit out something to the nearest penny. There's some care to be given in communicating what this is saying, what it's not saying. So this is going to be, what is the size of the prize and what is the cost of that? It is not, business case level figures. It is designed really to help guide the decisions that lead you there. So to put it bluntly, should we accelerate our fleet decarbonisation programme or our buildings? If we've got an extra £1 million of capital this year, is it better to put it into that programme or that programme in terms of the amount of carbon it will knock off our baseline come 2030? It'll help answer those questions.
Thanks, Chair. Just to give some comfort to everybody that as Ed says, that there will be limitations to this, but the Energy Service can help with that much more detailed technical kind of feasibility review of what your fleet needs to look like, and whether it is a third of your vehicles or whether it is 2 vehicles that won't transition. That's the sort of support that we're here to provide. So then once you've got the number, you can then plug that into the scenario planner, and we can help you build those up. I think in terms of thinking about, for example, your fleet transitions and the use of hydrogen as a region, we've got the regional energy strategy, which really is a sort of master plan of what you said you wanted to do as a region and where you wanted to focus. You're now going to have a bottom-up evidence base with your local area energy planning. That's going to give you, once we've had the workshop and we've got the team to kind of prioritize, that's going to give you some really clear areas to investigate a bit more thoroughly than we have at the minute. We've got a couple of hydrogen vehicles on trials, but they are still way more expensive and way less efficient. So I think that's one of the areas that as a region you can benefit from, the fact that you are going to have some hydrogen, where it's going to be and how it's best going to be deployed. Collectively we can work that out together and make sure that we get it used in the right places and factor it then into your wider decarbonisation plans. So not just Swansea looking at it, but looking at the whole region and how it's all going to kind of fit together. Hope that helps.
Sorry, did you call me in there?
Sorry, I must still be struggling with the connection.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say thank Victoria for the work her and her colleagues are doing. We've We've started some deep dive work on our fleet and supported by the Energy Service, and our early assumptions are that hydrogen doesn't really have a place in the future of our fleet as things stand. We were given some quite in-depth presentations around where the manufacturers are taking their vehicles, and the size of vehicles that we would ever require as a local authority do not seem to fit into the model of vehicle designed for hydrogen currently. I'm open to somebody contradicting that, but as you said, the fleet, the vehicle size and the technology and the expense leads me to believe that we start off with the smallest vehicles that can transition quite easily to EV and wait for the technology to develop. And what it looks like is that it's the battery technology that looks most likely to be able to be the most appropriate for the size of vehicles we've got. We do have 3 waste lorry on EV, and the feedback is that they look like they would be able to service the whole authority. There have been some minor glitches at the start, but the range and everything fits in with our demand, and it's quite a large county as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Very interesting. Reece?
Yeah, I think it's probably less so for us, Paul, in terms of the initial sort of scoping out we've been doing. But there's a bigger issue here about procurement. You know, whether we can get a better deal if we go together. But at what point do we go together? Because we're all at different stages in terms of the lifespan of the vehicles that we've got, and what is the mix between sort of, you know, hydrogen and electric, and possibly even some of the older technologies for a little while longer. So anything that brings that sort of information together around fleet would be really, really helpful, actually. So I'm sure that's something that Dan will be doing for us within Pembrokeshire in liaison with our waste services, but it's sharing that across the region. And if this is the forum to do that, great. If not, we need to find some way of doing that. Thanks.
Thanks, Reece. Another thing for that list, officer colleagues, about, well, what does the forward procurement plan for fleet look like? And have we got visibility across the region? Okay, great. No more hands up, so I think that brings us to the end of the discussion. That report was for noting, so we should do that. I'm happy to move from the chair that we note it. Can I have a seconder, please? Thanks, Andrea. All those in favour then, just a quick show of hands. Great, thank you very much. So is there anything else that we need to discuss? I've got urgent items on my list. There aren't any urgent items. Anything anyone else wants to put on the table before we disappear? No? Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. Nice to see you all. See you soon.